The Oracle of Luna is a podcast with me, Bridget Engels, as your host. Here we have conversations with real live, present-day goddesses who are actively and courageously doing their magical work in the world. Each episode is a bewitching journey with relevant discussions on topics such as Wiccan pagan spirituality, writing, culture, magical practices, art, ritual, and the craft in its many forms.
Welcome to the Oracle of Luna with Bridget Engels podcast. Today's episode, we have the amazing Evert Hopman, Druid, author, and herbalist. Welcome, Ellen.
Well, hello from an oak forest in Western Massachusetts.
Wonderful. That sounds amazing. It is a warm, pretty sunny day here in Seattle, which is pretty interesting to see the sunlight. I'm gonna just jump right in to ask Ellen some questions about her amazing journey and her books. Very prolific writer. So let's just jump in. Ellen, how did you get to be such an amazing druid and author? Where did it all begin?
Well, those are two different topics. As far as being a druid, I was born in Austria, in Salzburg, and my mother was very interested in archeology and art. And there were a lot of digs going on at the time. They were digging up Celtic graves, finding Celtic jewelry and iron objects and so on. And when I was a small child, my mother would always talk about the Celts, and she would talk about them with incredible reverence. And I just assumed that everybody grew up that way. It never dawned on me that it was anything unusual. And so I promptly forgot all about it. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s, when I was living in Philadelphia, I actually heard some Celtic music on the radio for the first time. And I instantly gravitated to the music. And then I became a Ceilidh dancer after that.
Wow.
And I started reading the books, the fairy lore in Celtic countries, and one day I had a practice in Philadelphia as an herbalist, and one of my clients came, and as I was taking her case, she started talking about that she had met a druid. And that druid actually ended up it was Isaac Bonowitz. And of course, I knew nothing about Isaac. I knew nothing about druids, but this would have been in the early 80s, I think, early or mid 1980s.
Yeah.
And it was just that I heard that word druid. Some people hear the word witch and they immediately think they're a witch. I've never had a resonance with that word witch, although some of my best friends are witches. But when I heard that word druid, I had that experience. As soon as she said that, it was, I just knew.
Yeah. So
And
that really sparked something within you.
Yeah, so then I had to try and find druids. And of course, there were no smartphones, there was no computer, there was nothing like that. And it took me a couple of years to locate druids. And I finally found ADF. I was one of the first 30 members of ADF.
And what is ADF?
ADF is, it's probably the largest American druid order, I think, now.
Okay.
It still exists, but I did a first circle initiation, second circle initiation with Isaac. Isaac was the person who initiated me. And then I left ADF and went on to co-found the Henge of Keltria, which is another Druid order. I was one of actually, there were only 5 of us in the beginning, and we all sat down around a campfire and decided what we wanted to, in a Druid order, which was to have a Celtic Druid order,
Right.
not Indo-European, but Celtic. And I was vice president there for 9 years. And then I went on to found the White Oak mailing list, which was designed to talk about what we wanted to see in terms of modern Druidism, what we thought a Druid should know. If you're going to call yourself a Druid, which is, it means you're an expert, basically,
Right.
if you're a Druid. So we spent a year talking about that, what a Druid is, what a Druid isn't. We created a training program. We said, these are the basic books, and this is what a Druid should know. And then a group of us founded the White Oak Order, Druid Order. And that went on for a few years. And I personally, I was co-chief there, and I initiated a whole bunch of folks. And then White Oak kind of petered out the way these things do. And I
Yeah.
founded another Druid order, which I am now the Archdruid of, which is called Tribe of the Oak. And I invite anybody who's interested to go to tribeoftheoak.com, and you can apply. We also do free public rituals on Facebook
Oh,
so that everybody can attend, especially during the pandemic. It's been really important for people.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you go to Tribe of the Oak Public Rites on Facebook, you can join that list and do
Okay.
all the ceremonies for free.
Okay. So, you are a very prolific author. What interests and inspires you to do this, and how do you weave your Druidism into your writing?
Okay, so that's the other story. Basically, I moved to New England,
Okay.
and that was in 1986, and I'm actually still in the same house. I'm remarkably stable.
Oh,
But
that's awesome.
yeah,
Wow.
but I live in the woods, and I remember I looked out the window, and I thought, goodness, the growing season is only about 3 months here. You can't plant until after Memorial Day, and then by the second week of September, you can get a hard frost. So
Wow.
it's a very short growing season.
Yeah.
And I knew that, Native Americans had been living here for many thousands of years, and then settlers came later. And I thought, how on earth did they survive? Because I'm the kind of person that I like to eat something green every single day.
Yeah.
And I thought, how did they do it? I couldn't figure it out. Because they couldn't go to the Stop and Shop, or, they couldn't go to the
Right.
corner drugstore. I mean, and so I looked out the window and I saw all these trees. And I mean, I'm looking out the window right now, and I see oak trees, and I see white pine, and I see some birches, um, and a little hemlock tree, and so on. And I just looked out the window, and that was all that I saw. And I said, it must have been something to do with the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately went down to Barnes and Noble, I think, and I started looking. I didn't have a computer. I
Yeah.
was looking for books that would show me how to eat trees
Oh,
and make medicine from trees, and there wasn't anything.
yeah.
There wasn't anything. And I was in graduate school at the time. This is the craziest part. If you've ever been in graduate school, you know that you're busy
Yeah.
from the minute you get up until, and in graduate school, I decided that I had to write the book. I said, well, if there's no book out there, I guess that means I have to
Yeah.
write it. So I started writing, and that's how tree medicine, tree magic happened.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay.
And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah. And what did you get your master's in?
I finally got a master's in mental health counseling, and I have everything but the final exams for a master's in art history. And
Okay.
yeah, I just never finished the art history. That's a whole story.
Yeah. There's only so much time in the day, right?
but but I have a list, a big list on Facebook that has over 6,000 people on it now, which is
Wow.
just for ancient art and archaeology. So my art history interest and my mother's archaeology interest and
Yeah.
all that is still going, you know.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Oh, that's very cool. So now you talked about Celtic Druidism, um, and you talked about herbalism and tree magic, um, and your study of mental health therapy. And do you weave that all together in your writing somehow, or do you like to weave that together?
Well, the mental health part, I did work as a crisis clinician for a
Okay.
while, and then I did a lot of many years of private practice with flower essence counseling, things like that.
Okay. Now that
Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
I
Okay.
don't, yeah, I don't write about that so much because that was my day job. What
Sure.
I write about more is usually Scottish or Irish um, uses of folkloric uses of plants, I would say.
Okay. Okay.
And
Yeah.
the plants here in New England are pretty much identical to what you find in Ireland and Scotland.
That is
So,
fascinating. I did not know that.
yeah, I mean, it's very different from the West Coast. Like when I go out to the West Coast, the plants are completely different. Or if you go into the desert, you know, the plants, Texas, New
Yeah.
Mexico, Arizona, the plants are completely different. But it just happens that where I live, it's the same plants. So I can study Irish folklore, you know,
Mhm.
folk uses of plants, and I can study Scottish and or English, and I'm just fine. You know, and that's how I did the research.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing how those plants got there. I mean, do you think that the settlers planted them, perhaps?
Yeah, some of them were brought here, definitely, like dandelions, for example, were brought here. But I mean, if you think of a map of the world, I'm kind of just on the other side of the pond, you know,
Right.
from
Right.
so seeds, I'm sure, were drifting back and forth across the Atlantic
Oh.
for millennia, you know.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Well, that brings me to my next question. Ireland has been a very special place for you to connect with in your spirituality and books. Can you tell us a little bit about uh, Ireland and your connection to Ireland and what draws you to Ireland?
well, my Druid group, which is called Tribe of the Oak, is very Irish centered, and the reason we do that is just that the oldest Druidic writings that we have happen to be from the Irish tradition.
Okay.
There are, well, there's Taliesin in the British tradition, but by and large, most of the oldest material was first written down by the monks who came to Ireland. And they did that because in order to convert the tribes, they had to know the stories because
Right.
you were not regarded as an educated person unless you knew the stories. And
Yeah.
you had to know about the gods and goddesses and all the, you know, the she realm, that's the fairies, you know, you had to know all that stuff. Otherwise you
Sure.
would come into a village and they would think that you were just some ignoramus, you know. So
Right. Right.
it's nice that they wrote things down. um, but they also, for example, with the Brehon laws, which are the old tribal laws, they inserted a lot of Christian ideas.
Yes.
So it's very hard, even with the stories, they'll sneak in little Christian proverbs and things, you
Mhm.
know, so
Yeah.
it's hard to tease out sometimes what's what, but
Yeah.
it is the oldest stuff. So if you're interested in wisdom poetry and the really old stories, you know, they were in the oral tradition for thousands of years, and then the monks wrote them down, and then once the monks were established as being intellectuals and learned people, then the Druids, who were the intellectuals and the learned people, kind of got together with the monks, and then they eventually fused and created a new type of religion, which was the Celtic Christian path, or the Chaldee, which looks very different from Roman Catholicism.
Yeah, and at that time when I'm really interested in the time when Christianity kind of starts taking over in Ireland, and the monks were kind of placed there to report back to the Roman Catholic Church, right?
Yeah, and eventually the Pope, of course, declared the Irish heretics, and they said they had not found any Christians among them. They had been Christians for centuries because the Celtic Church looked so different. I actually wrote a trilogy of novels about
Yeah,
this.
I was going to get to that.
Yeah, it's because I was trying to understand myself, because I'm a Druid, but modern Druids, there are modern Druids who are Christian, but they're not that many of them.
Yeah.
Most modern Druids are pagans, which means that we value nature more than anything else, you know.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't understand why the pagan Druids would have gotten together with the Christian monks. It just didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the 3 novels, Priestess of the Forest, A Druid Journey. The second one is called the Druid Isle, and the third one is Priestess of the Fire Temple, A Druid's Tale. But I wrote the novels in order to understand through the characters what was going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, because you really weave in the Druid spirituality and perspective so well. It's one of the best books I've ever read, and I highly recommend it to all my circle members that I have, and anybody, because it's just a beautiful story. It's so well written, and it really you really get into the folklore and the magical practices and the rites and rituals of the Druids then. And uh, I don't know, it's one of the most amazing books. But I feel like I'm there. I'm in that ritual. So I can see where you bring up your Druid practice, and then all your research about Celtic spirituality and Druidism.
Yeah, that's part of it. The other part was something that I did not expect, which was that, and other writers talk about this. There's something called the writer's trance, where you sit down to write and the characters take over.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And some people call it channeling, but writers call it the writer's trance. And what would happen is I would end a chapter and I would have no idea what was going to happen next. So I would sit down at the computer, and within a minute or so, the characters would start showing me things, and they would start talking and running around and doing things, and things that I never would have thought of, you know. And then all I was doing was just following them around and recording what they were saying. And I have a friend, she's deceased now, but she wrote a novel about the Mayans, and she had the exact same experience in her novel. Her name is Anna Korn. Oh, sorry, not Anna Korn, Anna Quinlan. Anyway, she's not with us anymore, but she was writing about the Mayans, and what the Mayans showed her, that as she was writing, was that one city was able to conquer the other city because there was an underground tunnel. And so she writes this novel, and she has the warriors going through the tunnel to the other city. And then after she wrote the book, archaeologists found the tunnel.
Wow.
That happened. Yeah. So the same thing happened to me. The first novel, Priestess of the Forest, came out, and in the book, I have a very elaborate scene where there's a funeral.
Yes.
Right. And one of the things I did with the books is I tried to have all life passages covered, with rituals. So if anyone wants to, like somebody just asked me recently about a baby blessing. Well, in that book, there's a baby blessing ritual, but so in the book, there's this funeral and the characters showed me the funeral. I didn't know what a Druid funeral looked like, but they said, oh yeah, they were burning mugwort and they were wafting it with eagle wings and they were drinking mugwort tea so that they would have a vision, and the deceased was lying there, and the idea was that the deceased would speak to them, and they would sit up all night drinking the mugwort tea and so on. Anyway, so I wrote this funeral, and 2 months after the book came out, the very first Druid grave that they ever identified, the archaeologists ever found that they thought this is definitely a Druid's grave because of what was in it. There was a container in the grave and they opened it up and it had last held mugwort.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
See,
So,
I thought I knew when I read your book twice. I read the whole series, but I read Priestess of the Forest a couple times, and I just felt magically transported, and I felt like, gosh, I wonder if Ellen Hopman is being transported in trance to write this stuff, because it sure seems like it.
well, yeah,
So
much.
vivid.
Yeah, that's what was happening. It was like being on a shamanic journey, for years, because there's 3 books. And that's why, people keep asking me, when are you going to write the next one? And it was exhausting.
Yeah, writing is a lot of work. And did you travel? I'm sure you traveled to Ireland to do research, right?
When you say research,
Inspiration.
Research means sitting on the ground.
You're
yeah. No, I would go up to a stone fort and I would just look at the stones, and then all of a sudden I would get a sense of what had happened there.
Yeah,
And
inspiration.
I did the same thing in Scotland. So the first book starts in Ireland. The second book goes to the west coast of Scotland, to the island of Ione, which is a real place where I really did stay, where I really did walk the entire circumference of the island, and I really did suss out the various power points.
Wow.
And you can do that. You can go there today and you can find those places.
Oh yeah.
And so that's the second one. And then the third book goes back to Ireland again. And the third book happened because I happened to read one sentence. And that one sentence was, Saint Brigid of Kildare based her fire temple on an earlier pagan model. That's
Right.
all it said. There was no description of the earlier pagan temple, nothing. And all of a sudden, like, that one sentence just launched the whole book.
It sparked something.
Yeah, so it's about the pagan fire temple that predates Saint Bridget.
Right. And so I was going to ask you about deity that you connect with, and you just said it. You just mentioned Goddess Brigid. So, and you felt like that that was a story that was important to uncover and kind of get to the bottom of the myth of it, right? And to just really understand the priestess, the fire temple priestesses.
Well, like with the first novel, I feel like Brigid is working with me, and
yes.
Obviously you have the name Brigid, so you might understand.
And that's my real name. I didn't.
No, but I've been a devotee of the goddess Brigid for over 30 years now, and I have an altar that's just for her. And at Imbolc, I make a bride doll, and I put out my brat, and put out a basket of clooties and make milk offerings, and I do all that. I've been doing that for over 30 years. I feel like she has been working with me and she's been pushing me.
Yeah.
So I have, I think, 15 books in print right now.
Yeah, I know. You're very prolific.
And there's 2 more that I'm working on at the moment. But you know, it's kind of inexplicable. Like, why do these books keep happening? You know, even when I had a regular job, even when I was in graduate school, you know, I just had to keep writing. And,
Yeah.
and it's like there's this force, you know, this energy, the fire in the head, as they say.
That's right. Fire in the hearth, fire in the home, fire in the head.
Yep. Yep.
Well, yeah, it definitely explains why your books are so brilliant, because they really, to me, they've been really enlightening to me on my Wiccan path. And I always recommend it to all my new circle members and anybody who's looking for a great, Druid type of Celtic book that's historical, but it's great love story as well. So, um, anyway, I just want to interject that in there because I was going to ask you. I heard something about a movie. You were going to write a screenplay, possibly, a Priestess of the Forest. Is that true?
Yeah, that was in the works. Right now it's sort of on hiatus, but I do have an actual Hollywood actress, a real one with real creds, you know, and but I've had a couple of different screenwriters kind of tackle it so far,
Uh
and
huh.
nothing has really gelled, which is too
Oh,
bad. Yeah, because I
yeah.
had a music person lined up. Um, you know, like I said, I have this wonderful actress,
Uh
Elise
huh.
Poppers. She's the real deal. And she wants to do it. And you know what stopped us really was the money.
That the funding, it's
Yep.
always a problem. It's so hard to come up with all that money. But anyway, I was getting really excited about that because, people are hungry for the myths and the gods and the goddesses and ancient druidism. They want to know about it. And, you could see it in like Britannia, shows like Britannia. I don't know if you're familiar with it, or the Lost Kingdom. Um, I just think people are ready for it. And I was like, gosh, I hope
Oh, I
that.
agree with you. I totally agree. But do you know what a low budget movie costs
I
now?
know.
Do you know what low budget is?
Oh,
10 million.
yeah, I know. I know. Even for an
That's
independent film, it's really expensive, and it takes a lot
yeah.
of work to get the funding. But okay, well, someday, right?
Well, if anybody's listening,
Yeah.
if you have any connections, just let me know.
Yeah, yeah. But the screenplay's been written, right? I mean, no, or
Uh, One screenplay was written, and she actually took it to, I don't know what the language is. She took it to wherever you take them. And she showed it around.
studio, movie studio.
No, it wasn't a studio. It was like I don't know what the word is. They have this big meeting where people bring a lot of different scripts. And
Okay.
it wasn't, no, it wasn't bought. Let's put it that way.
I'm wondering
Um,
if Netflix or some a cable
well,
Netflix.
that's exactly who we were thinking, Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
But all it takes is money.
I know. It really does. Well,
And
I hope you get that funding because it would be phenomenal to see it on film. So let's see. What can you tell us a little bit more about your herbalism and where that started? I know you studied it, right? And
yeah, okay, so that's the other long story that I that I was alluding to. When I was in graduate school studying art history, I had straight A's, and I was a presidential scholar at Temple University.
oh,
And at one point, I was a TA, which means I was a teaching assistant and all that, and I was making straight A's all the time. So they offered me a scholarship. They said, "Hey, we think you need to go to Italy." And I said, "I don't want to go to Italy." I said, because I was actually working, I had an internship at a museum in Philadelphia where I was cataloging early American photographs, you know, like salt prints and egg albumin prints, and and I was really getting into it, and I could see myself kind of becoming an expert at that. And they said, "Oh no, we want you to study Renaissance art." And I didn't want to study Renaissance art, but they wanted me to. So they shipped me off to Italy, and I had an all expenses paid. What could I say? Um,
That sounds pretty nice.
so they sent me there, and I started out, I was supposed to write my thesis on something Renaissance. That was their decision, not mine. So I thought, okay, I'll write about baptismal fonts, because I thought it was very interesting that Catholic baptismal fonts had dolphins on them.
Oh,
And I wanted to understand what that was all about, because there were no dolphins in the Bible that I
yeah.
knew of. Okay. So anyway, I was studying in the Hertziana Library, the Vatican Library, dutifully in the dark, taking notes, scribbling away. And I taught myself Italian, by the way.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
impressive.
I did that in my spare time. But anyway, so there I was. And then I went to Assisi because I wanted to look at the frescoes by Giotto in the cathedral at Assisi.
Hmm.
So I took the train from Rome. I went to Assisi. I get to the cathedral, and I'm looking up at the ceiling where all these murals are about St. Francis, and they're all covered in gold leaf,
Right.
And so I thought, this doesn't look right, because what I knew of St. Francis was that he was very humble and wore brown robes and lived in caves. And so I turned to a monk. There was a monk there, a brown robe Franciscan monk. And I said, these pictures don't look quite right. Where can I find out about the ways St. Francis really lived? And he said, go to San Maceo. And I said, what is San Maceo? And he said, it's down the road, just follow the road. Don't ask any questions. And I was like, okay. So, so
Strange.
I went trotting down the road, and then on the left-hand side was San Damiano,
Mhm.
which was built for St. Clair. And then on the right-hand side, there was a wooden sign pointing off to the right, and it said San Maceo. And I said, okay, San Maceo. So I followed the sign, and there was a muddy track, and I came to this gathering of buildings. They were sheep folds. And there were these people sitting on the grass. And I said, what is this place? And they said, oh, this is a Franciscan community. Have you come here to live?
Oh, wow.
And I said, I don't know, And
Maybe.
so anyway, I ended up spending time there. And then I went back to Rome. I got all my stuff, went back to Assisi again, and lived in the community for a while.
Oh,
And
wow. Fascinating. What
so,
went on in that community?
well, you were asking me about how I became an herbalist.
Yeah.
Well, twice a week. Well, so we had chickens. We had to feed the chickens. There were fields that had to be tended. There was bread that was baked in a stone oven, and the animals, the ducks and the chickens, were allowed to come into any building that they wanted. They just wandered around. And twice a week, on Wednesday and on Sunday, we fasted. And then we were supposed to just not eat anything, and you could drink herbal tea or you could drink water. And then you were supposed to just head out into the wilderness, they called it. You're just supposed to start walking with no plan.
Okay.
So twice a week we did that. So one day I started walking, and I just was climbing this hill, Mount Subasio, which is a hill where St. Francis used to roam around.
Mm-hmm.
And I was climbing and climbing and climbing. I was above the tree line, and this big storm came up, and there was thunder, lightning, and snow. It was thunder snow. And I remember there was nothing up there except one little tiny pine tree. So I wrapped myself around the tree, which was not very smart. And
Uh-oh.
if lightning was going to hit anything, it would have been that tree. But
Yeah, I was
anyway,
gonna say.
yeah.
Like,
So and then I remember the storm passed very quickly. But when I looked at my shoulders were caked with snow. I remember that. So I came back down the hill, and because of the lightning and everything, I was just filled with energy, and I was singing at the top of my lungs the whole way down. And then I came to this little chapel. It was a Romanesque stone building. And by the way, I write about this. I have a book called Secret Medicines from Your Garden,
okay.
and I have this whole story in there. But anyway, so I went into this chapel, and it was perfectly dark in there because it was pre-Gothic. It didn't have any of the stained glass windows or anything. And it was really dark. I sat down on a bench and I heard a voice. And the voice said, everything that you've been doing up until now was for status and for intellect and to please your parents. You are supposed to be working with plants.
Oh, wow.
Now,
Oh,
keep in mind, I was an art history major working on my master's. Like,
right.
but when I heard that, it was like I knew that it was correct. I knew that it was absolutely correct. And I mentally started dropping everything. I said, okay, I guess that means I have to drop the degree. I have to drop the college studies, the university. I have to drop the master's thesis. You know, I'm throwing out all these things mentally. And as I'm throwing them out, I'm feeling lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter.
It was divine intervention.
Whatever it was. And so anyway, long story short, I went back to Philadelphia eventually to the university, and I announced to them that I was not finishing my degree. And boy, were they upset.
Yeah.
And my parents were upset, and everybody was mad. Um, but then I sold all my possessions and I went back. I went to Scotland and I lived at the Findhorn community for a while after that,
Oh, I've heard of
working in
that.
the gardens, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And then I studied with William Lasassier. He was my teacher for 5 months in New York City,
Hmm.
and I, that's what I've been doing ever since.
Oh, okay. All right. What a wonderful long winding kind of road, kind of a path.
Well,
That you've been on.
you asked.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. I always wonder, how people get to the place they're at, and it's always a full of detours and winding roads, and but eventually we get there and it's kind of aligned with our soul path and our purpose, and it's just fascinating. So well, that's very cool. I really enjoyed hearing about the St. Francis community there. That is very telling of kind of how you began your journey as a herbalist and the detour that you took.
Well, the community is still there. It's called San Maceo.
Okay.
And but I've seen pictures. I haven't been back, but I have seen pictures, and it's incredibly built up now. I mean,
uh,
it's really, it looks very snazzy, you know. And when I
oh.
was there, it looked nothing like that because we had basically two sheepfolds, one for the men and one for the women, and and we slept on straw mattresses, and there was no hot water. It was just cold water. Um,
Uh,
you know, and now it's all built up, you know.
now it's a spa.
That's what I mean, it just looks like a really fancy Catholic retreat at this point, but
Uh,
you know.
oh, wow, that's interesting. So, I was going to ask about Druidism and what does it mean to be a modern Druid in 2021? Um, do you still go out in the woods and do ritual and honor nature, or is it kind of changed a little bit? What's your take on that?
Well, modern druids obviously are not ancient druids. The ancient druids, they, you know, the Celts were headhunters, and they sacrificed animals, and probably sacrificed humans, although we're not, it looks like they did, or at least they had capital punishment, just like we do. And they used women as units of currency. But we don't do any of those things, so there's no unbroken lineage from the ancient Druids to the modern Druids. So modern Druids are basically, my group is called the Celtic Reconstructionist Druid tradition, meaning that we're picking and choosing what we like, from the Celtic tradition.
Okay.
We don't kill animals. We don't do head hunting,
Yeah, right.
but yes, nature is always, as with any pagan worth their salt, nature is always number one.
Right.
But of course, for the past year, we haven't been able to gather.
Right.
I normally do rituals here on the land. I've also been invited to Ireland. 2 years ago, I was invited to go to Ireland to do a land blessing ceremony, which I thought was really unusual. Why would they need an American to do that? But apparently they didn't really like the Druids they had met, so they invited me, and they were happy with what I did. So that's
good. Well, that's an honor.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Yeah, but then I said to them, look, you really need to find an Irish Druid. That's what I told them, and I gave them a list of Irish Druids, and I'm still thinking about who they could. I have at least one Irish person in my group now, and I'm hoping that when he's trained, it would be really nice for him to be their Druid. They're looking for a Druid to be. They have lots of cows and lots of land, and they just want a Druid so they can be a tribe,
Yeah.
But
so there's some modern Druidism in the U.S. Is it pretty similar to I guess modern Irish Druids?
Boy, there's many different Druid orders.
Okay.
And a lot of Irish Druids are studying with Obod, which is an English order. And we're Americans, and we're studying Irish Druidic tradition. So there's just many different kinds of Druids.
Okay. So there's many offshoots, just like Wiccans and pagans. There's just many different.
Right. There's many different traditions.
Okay.
So I can only speak for mine.
Yeah.
But we would love to be out in nature doing ceremony. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we do offer for the public as a service. If you go on Facebook to Tribe of the Oak Public Rites, you can sign up, and we do ceremonies. And
perfect. Well, that's going to lead me to my last couple of questions here to wrap things up. So Ellen, what are some of your upcoming plans for the future? Like, do you have workshops or new books, travels?
Well, I'm going to be speaking. I'm speaking at a bunch of places, but Free Spirit Gathering is coming up. If you go to my website, elleneverthopman.com, it's just my name, elleneverthopman.com. I have a calendar there with all my upcoming speaking engagements. In June, Moon Books, I have one book out with them called A Legacy of Druids, and we have a conference. It's going to be on Zoom, so everybody can participate. I don't know if it's going to be Zoom or something like that, an online platform. Same thing with Free Spirit Gathering. That's coming up, and that's going to be virtual again. And I have some other virtual. I have some herb classes coming up April 24th.
Okay.
April 18th, I have a class at 6 p.m. on the 18th where I'm talking about the sacred herbs of spring. But I urge people, just go to my website, elleneverthopman.com, and look for my calendar, because everything that I'm doing now is virtual. There's nothing happening in person.
Yeah, but soon, right? with the
Yeah,
vaccination.
but the good thing about this is that people from all over the world can tune in, you know.
Exactly.
I'm even speaking in India in July.
Oh, wow.
I'm not going to India, but yeah, an Indian pagan group invited me to speak to them. So yeah,
Fascinating.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's turned out to be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ellen, for being on the Oracle of Luna. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure finding out about your journey and all your wonderful offerings as an author and herbalist. And I just wish you best of luck on all your future endeavors, and blessed be.
Thank you, and have a wonderful spring.
Yes, happy spring, everybody, and keep on witching or keep on druiding. All right, well, signing off. Thank you so much again, Ellen, and that'll be all. Bye-bye.
Bye.